why do I have to accept someone who died for me if I don't want to? If someone, Jesus, dies for me when I never asked him to for his own glory, isn't that selfish and prideful?
Think carefully. Who's the one who's wrestling with pride here? God who is perfect, or you and I who are imperfect? I think, fair enough, it's a great question, and I think it either comes from your heart or it's coming on behalf of somebody else, that someone else has raised this question for you. Sin is a capital offense. It's a capital offense. You reject God, and bear in mind, Jesus Christ didn't come into this world to make bad people good. He came into this world to make dead people live. You and I are dead to God. He came to make us alive unto God. He didn't just come to make me a very good person from being a very bad person. The reality is the heinousness of sin. It is so awful when sin becomes evil. Sin in my heart can be isolated in my expression. What is it? It's choosing my own way rather than God's way. But then, if I propagate that sin and multiply that sin, it sort of becomes evil and becomes like a cancer that spreads and destroys the soul. The death of Christ is to tell us a few things. Maybe I could illustrate it this way. I was speaking at the UN some years ago, and they asked me to speak on the search for absolutes in a pluralistic society. And you get about 18 minutes in which to do it, So I told them the 4 absolutes we really look for: evil, justice, love, forgiveness. How do we define evil? How do we define justice? How do we define love? And when we blow it, how do we gain forgiveness? I said, these 4 realities you wrestle with. You talk about just societies as UN ambassadors. You talk about evil nations. You talk about missing your families because you love them. And some of you are going to blow it ethically, and you're going to need to be forgiven. And they're all leaning forward and listening. Evil, justice, love, forgiveness. I said, we're all looking for those absolutes. I said, now let me ask you this. Where is the one place in history where these 4 converged? Evil, justice, love, and forgiveness. So they converged on a hill called Calvary, where Jesus offered his life, taking all the evil that was there, being a just God, expressing love, and saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Some years ago, India was subject to a terrible terrorist attack in the city of Mumbai. 2 of the major hotels affected were the Oberoi Hotel and the most beautiful, both of them are beautiful hotels, the Taj Mahal Hotel. I've been there a few times to have a meal, and they are lovely landmark hotels. And these boys broke in there and opened up their machine guns and just mowed people down. There are markers in the lobbies of both hotels for what happened that day. I happened to be there a few days after it happened, and I was in the Taj Mahal Hotel. That night I was watching the television news that was covering the story. The marks were still there. And an Indian-born English actor was being interviewed, and he told a remarkable story. Here's what he said. He said, I was in the Taj Mahal Hotel having dinner with my friends, and they were all mowed down. All of my friends were killed. The machine gun fire was going through our room. There were bloodied bodies. We were all piled up. He said, I dove over them, and I was right at the top. And I heard footsteps, and I knew it was this guy, the lead killer, who was walking towards us. I just closed my eyes and froze as best as I could. And he was right beside me. I knew his gun was trained on me. But he didn't pull the trigger. And he walked away. And the interviewer said to him, why do you think he didn't pull the trigger? He said, I don't know, ma'am. I really don't know. I only have one possible explanation, and that is this. I was so covered with the blood of my friends that he took me for dead and walked on to the next table to see who he could kill. In that simple metaphor, I was reminded of a conversation I had with a sheikh in Ramallah. We were talking about all the evils around there, and we were given a chance to ask him one question. I won't tell you what my question was because it was a private meeting, but I didn't like his answer. He's a muscle-bound kind of guy, could have broken me into two very easily. But I looked at him and I said, Sheikh, I may never see you again, but I just want to say to you this. 5,000 years ago, God commanded Abraham to take his son up a hill. I said, please, let's not debate which son. You know that he took his son up a hill. And as the axe is about to come down, God stops that arm and says, don't do it. I said, do you know that story? He said, yes. I said, what else did God say? God, through Abraham, said, I myself will provide. Stop. I myself will provide. I said, Sheikh, 2,000 years ago, a close walk from where you and I are sitting, God kept that promise. He took his own son up that hill, and this time the arm did not stop. And the Sheikh was just staring at me. I said, until you and I receive the son God has provided, we'll be offering our own sons and daughters on the battlefields of this world for position and power and land and prestige. He just stared at me. I said, that's all I want to say to you. The Archbishop who was with us said, I think it's time to go. So we left. And as we were walking down, the Archbishop was the guest of honor. This lead sheikh, who was a very vicious kind of guy in his history, served prison terms and all, took the Archbishop and ushered him into his car, and the others of us were going to our van. And I heard footsteps running behind me, and I looked over, and it was the sheikh coming after me. I said, that's it, I'm going to be buried in Ramallah. It's over, finished. He twirled me around. I have 2 titanium rods in my back holding me up. I figured my back was going to be in splinters that afternoon. He turned me around, and he gripped me like that, and he kissed me on both sides of my face. He said, Mr. Zacharias, you're a good man. I hope someday I will see you again. It's not what you think it is, that God having a nice, satisfying moment to take his son to the cross. He promised thousands of years ago that he was going to send you the greatest gift and pay the greatest price so that you and I may be drawn to him. If you look at it through the lens of his eyes of love, rather than your own eyes of thinking this is some kind of child abuse or whatever it is, you will not fully come to the dissonance until you see him face to face. I would be willing to lay my life down for my children and my grandchildren. It would not be a pride thing to do. It would be an act of love and sacrifice because of who they are to me. He paid the biggest price to draw you and me to him. Read the Gospel of John 3 times in a row and ask him to speak to you and see if you come to the same conclusion that the question seems to intimate. I think you will have a different answer to it. That's what I want to say to you.
Wouldn't mind seeing the question on the screen once more, if that's all right. And it's a great question, and it goes back to our discussion of hell as well. This idea, why do I have to accept someone? You don't. You don't have to accept him. But I just think that's incredible, that God would give his life even for someone who doesn't have to accept him and who may not accept him. Is that a God that's all about himself? No, that is a God who's about others. And I think we just underestimate the love of who Jesus is. Someone who said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Someone who looked down from the cross and said, Father, forgive them. Someone who said, do to others what you would have them do to you. The golden rule. We just think of that now as if everyone in the ancient world said that. No one said that. And that was completely countercultural. That's Jesus' original research. The closest we get is Confucius. He said, don't inflict on others what you do not want inflicted on yourself. But the difference between those statements, that's the difference between saying don't punch someone in the face and build your enemy a hospital. The world did not fall in love with love until Jesus came. And that's what we see at the cross, the fact that he would die for people, even people who may not accept him. And if I could just give you one more encouragement, as I just plead with you, no, you don't have to accept him, but please accept him. And I implore you not only to accept his death, but the acceptance is greater than that. It's his resurrected life as well. He calls it the fullness of life, a life that he says will be characterized by love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and generosity and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. What would your life look like if it was overflowing with those things? I think to my own life, and I think about who I was before Christ, someone who would never ask for forgiveness. Why? Because if I needed to be forgiven, I was bad, and if I was bad, I was wrong, and if I was wrong, I was unlovable. Boy, that would have been a recipe for disaster in marriage. And now, to be someone living with Christ and to find joy and being able to just put my hand up and say, you know what, I was wrong, and will you please forgive me? And what a blessing that has been in the context of our marriage, a healthy relationship that I know would not be there otherwise. I was headed towards unfaithfulness, towards a marriage that would have been destroyed. And I stand here today because of the transformation I've seen by Christ in my life in a completely different place. So just to go back to something I said earlier, what are your expectations for life? What were they as a child? What were they 10 years ago, 5 years ago? What are they today? How great are they? You know, if your expectations for life are low enough, you can get away with being your own God. I did for a long time. If your expectation is to be well-respected and run in the right circles, you can get away with the city being your God. If it's immediate pleasure, you can get away with sex being your God. But if you want something more, if you want the fullness of life, if you're willing to go back to that childhood idealism and say, you know what, there was something of God in that. I was intended for something more significant, for that fullness of life that Jesus talks about. Well, how big of a God will you need to make good on those expectations? And when you see life through that lens, through the lens that you were intended to see it and experience it and live it, I think only the God who is Jesus will do.
You've been watching Let My People Think with Ravi Zacharias. We're grateful for your prayers and financial support. If you'd like to know more about this ministry or would like to donate to our efforts, you can call us at 1-800-448-6766 or visit us online at www.rzim.org. You can also stay connected to RZIM through Twitter and Facebook. Our mailing address is RZIM, Post Office Box 1820, Roswell, Georgia 30077.